Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. Human beings have come up with quite a variety of ways of doing evil to one another. We could start with the mild forms, which barely scratch the surface of evil, such as general rudeness and insulting behavior. Most people realize that these sorts of acts and their countless cousins are simply people being people and dismiss them without much ado. But then we get to genuinely evil acts, such as damage to the property of another in one way or another. This includes all forms of stealing and anything which deliberately causes another person a loss of something. These acts, while difficult to forgive, tend to be forgotten over time. But true evil is found in those acts in which one person truly and purposely inflicts harm onto another. Such things could arise even without physical contact, such as in cases of slander or damage to reputation. These types of things are frequently more permanent, and thus the tendency is to remember them, either consciously or unconsciously, so the evil always remains in some way. Perhaps beyond these are those acts in which direct physical harm or pain is inflicted on another. All types of physical assault are included here, as is the ultimate example of this, murder. This is as bad as it gets in the unfortunately large catalog of human evils, and is generally considered to be the supreme evil one person can do to another. We have learned to not include in this rather depressing list of evils those acts which might be termed as such in religious societies or in certain specific cultures. The Bible is loaded with these, including such things as idolatry, a surprisingly wide range of sexual improprieties, eating the wrong kinds of foods, or contact with forms of ritual impurity. These have largely been expunged from the modern perception of evil. We either no longer are all that bothered by them, or we simply have to focus our limited scope on those things which do true harm to another person. Of course, they have been replaced in the modern world by other perceived acts of evil that were not deemed so in times past. This includes the ubiquitous accusations of racism or bigotry, the perceived slights in invading the personal space of another, or anything that smacks of disrespect for the earth and the environment. While not everyone agrees that there is anything all that terrible in these things, they are held to be that way by an ever-growing swath of humanity, and thus have attained the infamous status of evil. Indeed, many would say that they are the supreme examples of evil in the modern world. There is at least one act which spans the generations and the millennia as irredeemably evil and wrong, no matter how, when, where, or why. Records of this go back to ancient times, and it is almost invariably considered just as evil as it is today. All consider it absolutely wrong and an offense to the dignity and intelligence of what it means to be a human being. It is permanent and leaves its scars on its victims, both those directly involved and those who are forced to live around it. It is the ultimate form of sexual insult and violence, and is uniquely able to divide humanity into two categories, victims and perpetrators. It is rape. Rape has been depicted in literature since before biblical times. It figures in ancient myths of gods and mortals. It has been legitimized in times of war and for various other circumstances that demand rationalization. It is a primary subject of art and is now one of the main focuses of films and television dramas. Everybody is against it, but no society has been altogether successful in eradicating it. It seems to just spring up everywhere, regardless of whatever laws are in place to stop it. It will probably be there as long as sexual needs and wherewithal are around. It is a clear victim and a clear guilty party, but all too rarely is it stopped or punished. It is a blight on any society and an embarrassment of what it means to be a human being. It is perhaps surprising that there are only a few genuine cases of rape in the Bible. One is the horrible story of a concubine in a certain town in central ancient Israel. The woman involved is gang raped and then killed. It results in the eradication of almost an entire major tribe of the Israelite population. Another is the sad and traumatic story of Amnon and Tamar, children of King David. This involved the cardinal sin of the Bible, but Amnon couldn't resist taking his obviously forbidden sister to satisfy his perverted sexual desires. After committing the act, he despised her, an all too common reaction when there is no humanity in the sexual act. The third is in this week's Parsha, right in the middle and very prominent. It takes up a sizable chunk of the Parsha and is about as brutal a story as is found in the Bible. The build-up to this story is the first third of the Parsha. Jacob and his by now large family return from Mesopotamia to resettle in his ancient homeland. He has been gone for about 20 years and has at least 12 children and about 4 wives, depending on how they are counted. He knows that his twin brother Esau still likely harbors resentment against him for depriving him of the key blessing their old father bestowed upon his sons. This drama takes place both in the real world and the world of the subconscious. Jacob has to confront his actual brother and the inner demons he has carried around for the past couple of decades. He comes out of both confrontations whole and largely undamaged. Esau goes his own way, agreeing to bury whatever differences and animosity there was between them, and becomes irrelevant to the rest of the Bible. His genealogy takes up the last chapter of the Parsha, and it is pretty much the last we hear from him. The middle third of the Parsha is the rape story. Jacob settles his family near the ancient town of Shechem, near the eastern border of Canaan. He encamps there, hoping for a peaceful relationship with the people of the town. He buys land and erects an altar to his personal god, thus establishing his religious beliefs in his new home. The leader of the new town is named Hamor, and one of his sons was named Shechem, like the name of the city. At this point, Jacob's daughter, Dinah, enters the story. The text says that she, quote, went out to see the girls of the land, a rather vague description of what she was up to. In the course of this, Shechem, the son of Hamor, discovers her, takes her, and rapes her. The Torah is as clear as a bell about this, writing it all in a single verse. Instead of despising her, he is infatuated with her and insists that his father arrange that he can marry her. Jacob hears about all this before his sons do. A fateful meeting takes place between Hamor and Shechem on the one side and Jacob and his sons on the other. Jacob's sons are furious over what has happened, but Hamor tries to arrange things so that the marriage will be mutually beneficial. Each group will allow the girls from their side to marry with the men from the other, and all kinds of business opportunities will open up. Shechem, for his part, tries to butter up Jacob and his family, saying that he will do whatever they ask as long as he can marry Dinah. The sons replied that this can only happen if all the men of the town are circumcised. This surprising demand is surprisingly accepted by Hamor, Shechem, and the men of the town. Whether this was due to the influence of Hamor and Shechem or their own desire for whatever benefits would come from this is unclear. What is important is that they did circumcise themselves, and then the plot thickens. It turns out that the whole thing was a ruse by Jacob's sons to get the men of the town in a position of weakness in order to attack them when they were at their most vulnerable. On the third day after the circumcision, Shimon and Levi, 2 of Jacob's older sons, entered the town and managed to kill every male. They plundered the city, taking animals, women, and children. Jacob, for his part, wasn't thrilled with this act of violence. He accused them of getting him into trouble with the other inhabitants of the land, who might band together to attack them over what had just happened. The response of Shimon and Levi is simple and direct. Quote, "Should we have allowed our sister to be treated like a prostitute?" So ends the story. This is classic rape and classic biblical vengeance. The text leaves us a bit unclear over whether this was truly the right way of going about getting justice for what had happened. But what is clear is that something had to be done. Jacob's objections had to do with reputation and future repercussions, not with the need to avenge what had taken place. This is something that has to be dealt with swiftly and decisively. Otherwise, the problem will just get worse. Many who read this story are horrified by this case of vigilante justice. But those same people don't propose an alternative solution. They just hope the problem will go away. However, as we all know, it never does. Rape has been here since the beginning, and it shows no signs of vanishing from human society. Systems of justice have made valiant attempts to deal with it, with varying degrees of success. By and large, in Western society, the problem has been extensively confronted and rarely prosecuted to any degree that makes the potential victims feel safe. In many countries, the problem has become rampant. These tend to be those countries that have a large percentage of Muslim immigrants. This uncomfortable fact makes everybody uneasy and invariably evokes accusations of racism, giving the impression that the perceived bigotry is a more serious problem than the rapes. How these places will deal with this is their own problem. Here in Israel, we are in the middle of a war in which the Gazan invaders raped on a scale that seems downright medieval. While there have been minor uproars over this, with Israeli groups up in arms over the lack of attention and sympathy from the vast legions of feminist groups in the West, whose entire purpose is to contest this very thing, this has largely been a side story in the war. But it shows who we are dealing with. This was not a problem for these attackers. On the contrary, it was a sign of strength and victory, even if only temporary. Rape of the enemy women is part and parcel of what Muslim jihadists do and their supporters support. They make no attempt to mask this. How to deal with it is another matter. Whatever justicism is out there is obviously utterly powerless. It would seem that the example from the Parsha gives us an idea of how this must be handled. Sometimes there is no law to deal with it, and vengeance is the only path to righting this wrong. Most of us are uncomfortable with this, but perhaps we should be more uncomfortable with the alternative. If this matter isn't dealt with decisive force, we can expect more of the same everywhere. Perhaps the sons of Jacob, despite their father's objections, knew the way to nip a huge problem in the bud. Shabbat Shalom.